Could it really be true that this humble flat pack of cardboard ultimately became this? And this ultimately found pride of place on my humble desktop layout? Well, the short answer, of course, is yes. And the long answer is just look at this. So I'm going to spend a few minutes looking at the build of the actual church and then a few minutes looking at the build of the churchyard itself. And I just want to draw attention here that once I started popping out the window spaces to build up the layers for the windows and the frames of this kit, I realised I had bitten off an extreme amount of work. I mean, just look at how many different pieces go into such a simple feature as the buttresses for the church tower. And if you amplify that level of detail across the whole build, you can start to see why, even in these clips of the build of the church, they take place in different lighting conditions and locations, because I had to build it bit by bit over the course of, I think, maybe like 10 days, 9 or 10 days, something like that, because I just simply could not get enough time in one block to sit down and put it all together in one go. I do want to note here as well, when I first was building the church, annoyingly, I didn't go over all of the white exposed cardboard edges as I was doing it, which is the one thing I regret. But you'll see later in this video, when I start building the churchyard, I do go over all of those white lines, and the church building begins to look absolutely amazing, in my humble opinion. So here you can see I'm actually building this on my nan and granddad's kitchen table. The opening clips, I was building it on the boat that I was living on at the time, and when my nan and granddad went away on holiday and I decided to go in and stop there to look after the house and the garden and everything else, I turned their kitchen into a miniature workshop, literally on a miniature itself. And I mean, just look at that, how tiny those little cross details are for the tips of the church compared to a pound coin. So you can see the building is fantastic. This is definitely one of my favourite all-time Metcalf kits that I've built, and it was also one of the first N-gauge kits that I'd done. I'd done loads of double O gauge at this point, but as you can see, I only had the signal boxes to compare this to when it comes to the N-gauge scale. And the little detail that I thought at the time was a really good detail, and then somebody pointed out that it didn't look like there were just candles lit inside the church. It looked like the whole place was on fire. I'll leave judgment out there for you, but I thought as a really simple idea to add a little bit of difference and a bit of life to the model, I would just cut some simple holes in the base, which is why you can see it raised up off the ground there, and I sat it on top of some of the fake tea light candles, just the really simple little battery operated candles. And you'll see as the base is built for the churchyard, I actually simplified it even more to just put in the light bulb out of a fake tea light candle onto the battery out of a tea light candle. So originally I was going to create the churchyard base out of clay, but luckily before I committed to it, I realised I simply did not have the skill or the experience to do that, and just put the little lich gate together here. And I just want to note here, that is literally what I call the fine print. Lovely stuff. So yeah, instead of using clay to build up a little church on a hilltop, I very luckily, and the more I think about it, the more glad I am that I didn't try and get too clever for my experience level, decided against the clay, and I just built it up on this simple foam board. Now, I was betting big that I would be able to use static grass and a lot of general scenery and little bushes and things like that to cover up those very obvious steps in the base itself. And I don't think I did too bad a job, although you'll see in a minute that we get towards adding a load of static grass over that, because I'll admit that green does not look particularly realistic. So I think I mentioned earlier in this video, which seems a long time ago at this point, that I did go over all of the exposed white lines on the church building itself to get rid of that obvious horrible cardboard look. You'll see I also added a lot of general modeller's scenics and moss and things like that to it, just to try and add to that sense of it being a hundreds of years old building that's had all sorts of ebbs and flows of time and usage around it. And even things like you sometimes get the little sticks and bits of twig that come in the modeller's moss bags. And I just added a couple of those glued to the corner of the building to make it look like somebody'd added some planks of wood just leaning against there. And you can see here I was using the static grass tool to go through and cover up that horrible bright green base paint that I'd put on. Embarrassingly, I came across a very obvious problem here, and that was while I was gluing and painting the top layer of the foam board, it was of course making that top sheet of card start to contract, which was then pulling the bottom sheet up and around, so it was all bending upwards. So my only remedy to that was to try and then paint and soak the bottom sheet of card to try and pull it back and contract it back down straight. So you can see here it didn't really work, if I'm honest, and what ended up happening when this went on my 2x4 desktop layout that was the ultimate final home of the churchyard, I actually used screws to screw it straight down into the desktop itself. So the church can be removed, but all of the churchyard is a solid attached feature to the layout. And I just had to, once again, as happens very often with model railway stuff, bodge it up and cover it up with a few more bits of grass and lumps of rocks and so on. Oh, good old Pippin the cat there, bless her, rest in peace. Absolutely lovely girl she was. She once got on top of the 2x8 foot layout though, which I wasn't impressed with. So here you can see my extremely simple lighting setup. At this point, literally a stripped down fake tea light, and then two of the lights, literally just the light bulbs, plus the batteries from some others that I'd broken down. I will once again leave it up to your discretion to decide whether you think the church is on fire or it's just cosily lit from the inside by parishioners holding candles. Annoyingly, that one buttress isn't lined up with the church tower body correctly, so you can see that line of light, but of course that can be easily solved by putting a little bit of cardboard or paper up on the inside and no one would ever know. So to create the churchyard, I actually bought some plaster of Paris modelled gravestones and that little monument as well, and even those pieces of wall are actually made of plaster of Paris, and somebody on eBay was just obviously making them and selling them. So you can see there I added little details, a few sheep, the little bit of fence in there that you can see the kids or some of the locals are using as a little ladder to get up the steep bit, and the little track they're making, and you can see Darren the fencer there trying to put up all his new railings to again stop the kids clambering over and getting into the back of the church. So yeah, I just tried to add as much detail as I could without going overboard, and like I say, little tracks and having a bloke trying to put the fencing up to try and make it tell a story as a little snapshot in time. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in, my friends. Check out my other videos for loads more like this and things like boat life. And until the next time, keep it interesting, keep it loco-worthy, have a fantastic day, and of course, my friends, farewell.